everybody, and thank you for joining us on the Double Feature Film Chat Show. Try saying that a few times. We went for the longest name possible so no one could steal it on us because we had a bit of trouble getting to this wonderful name that we have. And no other reason than we are probably going to talk about at least 2 movies per week. We might get crazy and do more. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Last Picture Show and the last movie. But first, I have to introduce you to my associate and co-host, Wayne Byrne. Wayne, say hello to all the nice people in online land.
Hello, everybody in online land. I'm delighted to be here and to be the Paul Whisperer for this wonderful show.
and vice versa. So, Wayne, let's get straight into it. We kind of at random, you went to the last movie, and I said, kind of jokingly, I'll have a look at the Last Picture Show, which turned out both made the same year, both at the end of a particular era in Hollywood, and 2 really interesting movies. Let's start with the last movie. That was the one you chose. Why did you choose this film?
Well, it's one of my absolute favorite films of all time. But, you know, unlike, say, another favorite such as Masters of the Universe, I can actually, I think, give this a bit more of a kind of a critical and historical context. You know, it's so of its time and of an era, an important era in film history, which was the new Hollywood, new wave, whatever way you want to call it. In some ways, it's definitive of the new Hollywood in terms of its style, its excesses, the kind of authorship. It was directed by Dennis Hopper, and the kind of authorship that he and control he had on it. And in some ways, it kind of represented a premature death of the new Hollywood, because it really encouraged a lot of studios to take back control from the auteurs, you know, because they let one particular auteur go wild in Peru on their dime. And what he came back with was a film that was pretty much unsellable. And, you know, it was kind of unavailable or unseen for a long time. And it's only in the last year, I think it was re-released last year, back into cinemas and on home video in many territories for the first time. And it's interesting to look at the critical notices of when it came out in 1971 compared to when it came out last year again. And a lot of people are now saying it's a masterpiece, you know, that it is kind of an unheralded, unsung work of genius. I remember when I saw it on the big screen in the IFI when it got released, and it wasn't sold out. It wasn't too many people there, but a lot of the people in the audience seemed to be people who had seen it upon first release back in the early 70s. And it was gas, because as soon as the credits or the end of the film came up and the house lights came up, the people in front of me remarked, 50 years later, it's still a piece of shit, you know, which ran counter to.
But tell us a bit more about this so-called piece of shit. Tell us about the how it came about and what it's about.
Easy Rider, which was Dennis Hopper's directorial debut, was it blew the doors off, you know, the golden age of Hollywood, and it ushered in this, along with other films such as Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate, you know, came out in 1969, and it really instigated this new movement in Hollywood cinema, which was for the studio system, but they were very artistic and very kind of esoteric works. You know, Easy Rider is a very experimental film for a Columbia Pictures movie. And, you know, it was a massive success. You know, Dennis Hopper was hailed an instant genius and a voice for generation. So, of course, other studios wanted to capitalize on that, you know, because Easy Rider was made for some change and made Columbia something like 30 odd million in box office receipts. So the other studios wanted a slice of that. So at one stage, Ned Tannen, future producer, but I think at this stage he was an executive at Universal, he was tasked with, you know, bringing in a couple of these young auteur, up-and-coming filmmakers to, I think, make 5 movies, each under $1 million, you know, because it was to kind of capitalize on this whole youth movement and the excitement of these young filmmakers.
The studios had been trying to do that for a long time in the 60s, and they hadn't a clue. And there's lots of fantastic films that are these strange, creepy, historic things like Gidget movies and even Elvis movies that were trying to tap into the get down with the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, with these movies, I think they genuinely captured the interest or the zeitgeist at that moment, because they were counterculture movies. And of course, it was the counterculture era in American society. So Dennis, in all his drug-hazed madness seemed to kind of capture lightning in a bottle with Easy Rider. And so one of the films that Ned Tannen rolled into production for Universal was The Last Movie, and some of the others were Monty Hellman's Two Lane Blacktop, Peter Fonda's The Hired Hand. But those were the kind of films that Universal wanted to kind of capture and release and, get the youth audience in. They all failed miserably. And one of those was The Last Movie. And it was, unlike The Hired Hand and Two Lane Blacktop, which have kind of, traditional narratives, their aesthetics, the style is quite different than all of them, but at least they have a kind of a narrative through line, a traditional narrative. The Last Movie completely tears up the rule book in terms of narrative cinema, and it forces a viewer to question how we consume cinema, how we relate to a work of art. Objectively speaking, it's probably hard to watch the Last Movie and enjoy it as a piece of traditional entertainment, if you know what I mean. The kind of the idea that you lose yourself in a narrative and you get invested in what's going on this fictional world, because Hopper constantly throws it back in your face and reminds you that you're watching a film, because every now and again a title card will come up saying scene missing. The narrative is all over the place in terms of the middle section is at the end, the end of the film is at the start.
Should be noted that the influences were European.
Absolutely.
Bergman is in there as an influence, and Godard, and particularly one Godard film I noticed because I'd seen it recently was Pierrot Le Fou, which plays with narrative ideas like that to more comic effect, I would say. Bergman was constantly reminded you of The Artifice and still managed to maintain the grip on you when you're watching his films. I mean, several of his films start with the sense of hammering in the beginning of a show being made, but then he does pull you into it. And I felt with the Last Movie, it did both. It pushed you away, and there was probably some of the humor was maybe a bit too pretentious for its own good. And those long travelogue shots, they're nice, but not everyone's going to find that amusing.
Well, this is what I'm talking about in terms of it will challenge you in terms, is it entertaining? I don't know. It's very much I think an intellectual exercise, and I think that was Hopper's intent. I don't think he ever wanted people to kind of get lost in the narrative or to be entertained in the traditional sense. The story of The Last Movie is very simple. It's about a Hollywood Western movie production is being filmed in Peru, and Dennis Hopper, his character's name is Kansas. He's a stuntman, prop guy, and when the film finishes wrapping, he decides to stay on. And the sets remain, all the props, and the local indigenous people decide that they want to make their own movie based on what they've seen, which is, of course, was all fiction and make-believe. But they take it to a dangerous level. The violence they recreate is for real, and it has deadly ramifications.
This is just one of the plot lines, but it's just the most discernible and one you can get your head around. He also goes in search of gold, a live sex show, and has an ongoing thing with his Peruvian girlfriend, which gets much screen time. I was surprised how little screen time the story got, that story of them performing the rituals of the film.
Yeah, I think that's part of all the comedy element or the satire, which is quite heavy-handed. I mean, his Peruvian girlfriend constantly goes on harangues him about, she wants the material goods. She wants the good life she wants a General Electric refrigerator.
Has a delusion that he's there to get away from all things American. Yeah, he's bringing the baggage with him. It's in him. He's not escaping anything. And they meet other Americans who become their best friends outside of his Peruvian girlfriend. And Don Gordon turns up as in a very odd little subplot about going to chase gold, which we never really see. We see a scene from that scenario later on.
The movie is kind of reflective of where he was as an artistic figure, a filmmaker at that period, where this is his Jesus Christ moment, isn't it? That he's...
But Brando had loads of them in the 60s. So was he parodying them, or was he... Because it's that great moment at the end where he does a scene 3 times, or a action 3 times, where he gets to run and fall on the ground and get up again. I found that quite poignant. It's nearly the end of the film where he's finally being crucified in his own weird way.
Well, that's it. It's one of the intertextual moments of the film where he breaks the diegetic world of the film. So we're seeing multiple takes of him doing this shot, and he gets up and he rubs himself off and he walks towards the camera and kind of gestures to go again or cut or whatever it was. So he's constantly kind of breaking it out of the film, and it's a film about filmmaking, both literally within the story and the kind of diegetic world of the film, but also extra diegetically. It's a film which kind of tears up all the rules of how you're supposed to present a film to audiences, and kind of leaves it up to yourself to interpret, because the plots are kind of threadbare. So there's not a whole lot to kind of get invested in emotionally. I think the emotion of the film comes from its construction.
Okay, so was he trying to punish people for coming to the cinema, or what was he up to?
Well, it's definitely a test of some sort. But I think if you're open to seeing kind of different kinds of cinema, you will be rewarded, because I find it a very emotional film, but not because of the story or because of the characters, but because of the way he presents the film. The way he uses music, the way he uses montage, which, as Alfred Hitchcock would have said, montage is cinema, and that's really, at the end of the day, the only thing is Dennis Hopper's version of montage isn't invisible. He's letting you know it's montage. It's supposed to be invisible. You're supposed to get lost in it. But Dennis Hopper points at it, throws it in your face and says, look, this is a movie, but it's also a piece of art. You can get something from it if you're willing to accept something unusual.
It does have a lot of common points to Easy Rider. It's a lot of similarities. It's very much a companion film.
It is, absolutely. And I think that's why it's kind of baffling that audiences didn't take to it the way they did Easy Rider, because it's as experimental as Easy Rider. Easy Rider, people forget, I think, sometimes, that it is very experimental. It has the whole section in the last third, which you see this footage, which is very grainy, and it's shot on 8mm, 16mm footage, and it gets very, very trippy in places. But I think the lasting imagery of Easy Rider is the beautiful kind of aesthetic stuff, the landscape shots, the music, so sometimes it's hard to forget that Easy Rider was as avant-garde as it is. And so for me, the last movie is a natural successor. I don't know how it wasn't able to capitalize on the same audience as Easy Rider. It was only 2 years later.
The characters are a lot more likable, despite their outlaw aspect. They're a lot more likable than Dennis Hopper's character.
Yeah, I guess if I was to be critical, you could say there's a lot of self-pity going on in the last movie. There's tortured genius isms going on, and it could depend on your tolerance for that kind of egotistical mannerisms and behavior.
It's an interesting link now to bring us into the last picture show. Hopper was part of the James Dean gang back in the day. I think he was in Rebel Without a Cause. And Sal Mineo was in Rebel Without a Cause, who was a kind of lost genius actor who kind of had a very sad ending. I think he was murdered in a mugging, apparently. But he was the person who brought the book to Polly Platt, saying that that Bogdanovich should make it. I found that kind of an interesting little link there. Did you like what I did there?
Good, I have to say.
Thank you.
See, this is why I'll only do this show with you.
But the last picture show, I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I quickly got followed up by it, and I also started remembering it from a million years ago. It's Bogdanovich's second movie. It's in black and white. It couldn't be any more a opposite to the last movie, yet it's still technically a kind of avant-garde type of film, which mixes up classicism. Would you agree? Or is it classicalism?
Classicism? I don't know.
No, it's classicalism, I think. I'm not good at using those big words as you are, unfortunately. But yeah,
classicism is probably more of a sociological thing, but we're not going there.
No, we're not going to go there. Shot in black and white, it tells this tale of a bunch of kids just out of high school living in a very dusty Texas town. I think the original town was called Archer City, which is ironic because I don't think it's much of a city. And we get to hang around with Sonny and Duane and the girls that they chase and women they chase over the course of the film. It's very episodic, and it kind of technically doesn't go anywhere, if you know what I mean. And The Last Picture Show is a beautiful title. It just says everything about it. Just a warning, there are spoilers in our discussions, everybody. We should have said this at the start.
I think that's one of the most interesting things about The Last Picture Show, is the fact it relates to the title as well, is that there's something elegiac and there's something nostalgic about the idea of The Last Picture Show and the connotations of that. And that's the thing about The Last Picture Show. It is very classic in its form, but because it's New Hollywood and it's early 70s, they're touching upon themes and ideas in there that they could never have gotten away with back in the days of John Ford and Howard Hawks and the people that...
And the Hays Code.
Yeah. So, it is kind of there's a lot of duality going on there. It feels like you're watching this classic film from the 40s or early 50s, but all these things are going on that are so new, for that kind of filmmaking. And it's interesting that you say it's avant-garde. I don't quite see that as much as yourself, so I'd love to know what it is that you would consider the avant-garde elements of the film.
Well, I'm talking about those standards of 70s Hollywood where you actually got people doing things like being naked and all that. That would be regarded as avant-garde at the time. But,
yeah, I get you.
But as you say, its sense of framing and storytelling is, despite its episodicness, is quite classic. But I came away from the film with just I don't call it miserable as cinema because it's too romantic and it's got too much heart and soul, and it's never emotional. It's just a film about loss.
It's a tragic story.
Well, the character's lost from the very opening frame. We're in a kind of dusty morning, driving cars that don't really work past the dingiest spot on the planet to pick up a young kid who is the local mentally disabled kid who was looked after by a character called Sam the Lion, who's probably the only moral compass in the entire film of an adult perspective. All the adults are as lost as the young people grown up, and you just know they're going to replace them at some point in life. That's all you're left with. And The Last Picture Show, for me anyway, it's, again, it literally refers to the fact that the cinema closes down towards the end of the film because the one person keeping it alive is gone, and keeping it alive, that sense of value of watching these movies. And as you marked earlier on, the movie house is also where everybody goes for a grope, where all the kids discover sex, is in the dark, tune their gum and then snogging each other. But also cinema is there, and there's little nods that I think the last picture is the Red River, as you pointed out earlier. And the opening picture is Father of the Bride, which is a little ironic kind of nod to the fact that things are not going to go the same way in this film in terms of, doing things right. If anyone remembers that film, it's about the stress for a father whose daughter is going to get married and all the trials and tribulations of these middle-class white people. And we're going to see the exact opposite for the rest of that movie as they fumble their way through life and have affairs or not have them successfully or unsuccessfully. Cybill Shepherd plays this wonderful, she's not a man eater, that's the wrong thing to call her, but she likes messing with the boys' heads. And we know that she learned her mother was exactly like her in her own way. But it comes out of all this frustration of being who they are and where they are. Because the rich people and the poor people share one thing in common. They're in the same shithole. It
is quite a universal story because even though it's set in this small Texas town in the early 50s, 1951, there's many towns that I'm sure that are like that, in the middle of nowhere where, you have the sports team are the celebrities, the local sports team. That's the biggest thing on the weekly calendar or whatever. And you have your picture house or your diner, wherever it is that everybody goes to hang out and everything happens. And then you have the bar, and you have all these lives.
Just a low ebb of cruelty under the surface of the film all the way through. That kind of finally shows itself in a much darker way at the end when there's a death witnessed and looked at like a dog had been killed in the street.
And, but it's the kind of casual cruelty of it, which makes it even worse or more hard-hitting because these people just don't seem to have much of a value on life, their own life or other people's lives. And, when they witness somebody actually killed in the middle of the street, it's a horrible horrible moment, and it's a heartbreaking moment. But I think once that film loses Ben Johnson, who is he's the link to the old world, but he's gravitas, and he's respectful, and once he's gone, it's almost like the heart of the town is gone, because he was a link for a lot of people. He was the one who ran the diner or the restaurant or the pool hall, whatever it was, and without him, there's no kind of moral compass almost.
Without him, there ain't no picture show. There's no other escape other than the onslaught of modern America. As I think the manageress of the cinema says, well, there's baseball in the summer and television's on all the time. And that's like the American, and this is supposed to be set in 1951, yet made in 1971. So it's an interesting period piece. Again, like all good period pieces, it's really talking about the time it's made. And it's its allusion to one of the guys going to Korea would always be seen as being reflective of the Vietnam. But it could have been set anywhere. It could have been set before World War II and had gone into similar territory. It's good to know that Larry McMurtry is the writer, and you've seen there's one sequel made to it, and there's 3 follow-up books. And unusually, the main characters, they're known as the Duane Moore books, who is the Jeff Bridges character. Whereas in the film, if there's a central character at all, even though it's quite an ensemble feel at times, it's Sonny, the Timothy Bottoms character, who kind of carries, and he's the tortured soul who thinks a little bit harder than everybody else, but it's still caught up with who he is, a lost soul in this little limbo.
With Texas Phil, the film very much focuses more on Duane, on Jeff Bridges' character, because he's become a millionaire, local kind of not celebrity, but he's the money man. He made the money on the oil, and kind of, it's more of, I think the humor is more prominent in Texas Phil. There's soapish elements in the last movie or in the last picture show, but they're heightened in Texas Phil. It feels very much like a kind of a Douglas Sirk satirical melodrama for the early 90s. You know what I mean? It's Dallas only made better. It's great to kind of revisit these characters. When I first saw it years ago, I was kind of a little hesitant because, some films, some stories are best left finished where they finish, if you know what I mean. Like you don't really need or want to see what happened to these characters or where they ended up, because you can kind of fill in that yourself. You can kind of guess, or I guess that's part of the fun of it, is that you can kind of imagine where these characters went in life. But Texas Phil explicitly lays it out there. This is where they've gone, and they haven't gone very far. They're still in that town. Some of them are doing better in life, financially. Others aren't doing so well. But it's I don't know. I enjoy it, and I think it's a worthy follow-up to the last picture show. But the humor is probably a bit more pronounced than I would like it to be, and it's a bit more absurd. But definitely worth to watch, and it's interesting the way that it's Duane who becomes the central character.
Sonny's kind of like the Hamlet of it. You can only go do so much with a Hamlet character. Yeah, no one wants to know after a while.
It's interesting as well in Texas Phil, because the best relationship for me in the last picture show is the one with Timothy Bottoms and Cloris Leachman, which is this, she's, I presume, 20, 25 years older than him. He's 17, 18, but it's a wonderful relationship. There's genuine heart there, unlike a lot of the other relationships in the film.
It's the only love in town that either of them can find. She's a married woman to a gay sports coach, and he hasn't gotten what he would love, which is to be with Cybill Shepherd. And that opportunity comes later, and he sells her down the river as quick as you like. Yeah, that is one of the beautiful relationships. I think she got an Oscar for that as well, isn't she?
She did, yeah, deservedly so. She's absolutely fantastic in that film. And like I said, that final scene, I'm sure, was the one that made the Academy vote in that direction.
Bogdanovich is this wonderful link to a lot of older directors, and he comes from a great respect for the likes, especially I think, Hawks and Ford and Wells.
Ford's influence is written on the screen. I mean, all those great low angles and the sky taking up the top 2/3 of the screen, that's Ford.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned earlier on, it is 1971, and I think that's one of the intriguing things about talking about these two particular movies, because they're both out the same year, or made the same year, both wildly different. I mean, one was very much of the era, you know, taking advantage of the fact that studios were giving directors complete creative control to make the movies they wanted to make. And the other film then is a kind of a throwback to the golden age and the greats of that period. And, you know, that's why they're two great films to contrast in that respect. But both, as you say, you know, they are avant-garde in their own ways, but both wildly different in that manner.
And coming from auteur territory.
Oh, very much so. I think, you know, Hopper, as you mentioned earlier on, he's kind of bringing in the influence of Goddard, Buñuel, and people like that, Jodorowsky, you know, whereas Bogdanovich is bringing in Ford and Hawks. And there you go. But the last movie is also indebted to Westerns as well. It's about the making of a Western, but Hopper was also invigorated to write it based on his experience on The Sons of Katie Elder, because he had witnessed the same thing as what happens in the film, that one of whatever he was, the prop guy or stuntman or whatever, after the crew left that location, he stayed on, you know, and a lot of those sets remained erected in this landscape that, you know, you have these empty facades left hanging around. So that was an influence on Hopper in the last movie in a kind of in a literal sense, you know, obviously not in the filmmaking that came along with it completely. Hopper,
but yeah, very much they are both Westerns.
Yeah, it's they're both about America, you know what I mean? They're both about America at a certain time, different times in American culture, and it's amazing to think that they came out at the same time and both wildly different.
They're both made by people who were coming at new ways of doing things, one from older sensibilities and bringing new values to those sensibilities, and one that just try to turn the sensibilities inside out.
Another interesting thing about the background of those directors is Bogdanovich actually came from the kind of the Corman school, you know, with targets and all that. And he was a critic, so he was a writer, he was an author about movies as well. But Hopper came from the kind of the tail end of the classical era, you know, the golden age. But, you know, it's amazing to think that they came from those kind of opposing backgrounds, but their films represent something entirely different. You know, Bogdanovich, a yearning for the golden age and that Hollywood past. Hopper looking to just blow the bloody doors off American cinema.
Poor Dennis didn't make another film for 10 years, which he came back with quite an interesting film out of the blue. Bogdanovich did well in his next movie, Paper Moon, and then fell out of favor pretty quickly after that.
He had 3 great movies in a row, which was Last Picture Show, Paper Moon, What's Up, Doc? You know, so he was on a serious wave there of success. Hopper, yeah, as you say, he was essentially blacklisted from Hollywood after the last movie because Universal didn't want anything to do with it. You know, it got garnered angry response and reception upon release. When it was tested with audiences, they hated it. And I think it lasted on both coasts, East Coast, West Coast, New York and LA, for about a week, and then it was pulled, rarely to be seen again. I think Hopper regained control of the film, and he had fought to get it re-released over the last couple of decades of his life. But yeah, Out of the Blue is a terrific film, made in Canada. You know, and I think it forms an interesting trilogy with Easy Rider and the last movie. It's kind of looking at where those characters from those 2 movies may have ended up in life, you know, which is drug frazzled, alcoholic burnouts. I think Hopper is genuinely one of the great, you're probably going to disagree with me, one of the great geniuses of American cinema of the last 50 years. Honestly, I think he's, with those 3 films, there's more artistry in those 3 films than some directors have in a lifetime's work.
You can't take Blue Velvet away from him.
Oh no, I mean, geez, that year, I think it was 3 films. I think they're all 86.
But he balanced it out by making Speed as well.
But no, that year, 86, I think it was, you have Blue Velvet, you have Hoosiers, which I think he was nominated for supporting actor, and River's Edge. All terrific performances, and that was the year that Hopper came back.
He was a much more interesting actor as an older actor. Just definitely. I think the best things he did in his youth were die in John Wayne's arms twice. And let's face it, that's how If he hadn't died in John Wayne's arms, we wouldn't even have the last movie. Please go and watch these films, everybody. We'd love to see you fill the comments below. We'd love you to subscribe to our channel. If you comment and you're nice, we'd love to talk about your comments in a later episode. And who knows, continue the conversation. These are two really interesting filmmakers, Bogdanovich and Hopper. And I think there's a lot of other films we'd love to watch of theirs that we'll re-engage with and talk about down the line. I, for one, would love to see Out of the Blue again. I haven't seen it in a long time. And I would love to see Nickelodeon. But yeah, we're going to do more stuff on these guys down the line. I don't know what we're going to do next week, Wayne, but I'm suggesting to you now, I feel like I'm calling you out as a wrestler. Wayne, I say we watch 50s Westerns and we talk about 50s Westerns next week. Can you do this?
I'll step up to the mark. Don't worry.
Beautiful. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. Thanks for tuning in.